into the group as well. So hopefully everybody can navigate to where we need to go. Check things out right now. Whoop, you can tell I'm talking. So what I'm going to talk about today is prenups versus premarital planning. A lot of the time people kind of get them a little bit mixed up and or think they are the same thing. And they definitely have elements of each other and work really well with each other, but they're very different and they accomplish different goals at different points. So I'm going to start by talking about prenups because that's what people tend to think when they think about getting the law involved in their case or in their marriage before, they actually say I do. So what prenups are is they're a legally binding agreement that allows you to opt out of the government's rules and into the rules that you and your partner create on your own. One of the biggest things I hear from people when they maybe have objections to prenups is, oh, I love and trust my partner. I don't need a prenup. And I don't understand how those two things are connected, and I'll kind of explain why, right? A premarital agreement, the purpose is to define certain rights that each of you have discussed and agreed to. They often and definitely should involve lawyers. That's not necessarily required under the law to have lawyers involved, but the whole part of a prenup is a legally binding agreement. So you need to be educated about the law of the state that you're living in and determine whether or not you want to have those laws applied to your marriage or whether you want to create your own. And what I say is some people, once they're actually educated on the law, not Google search, that's very distinctly different, but educated on the law and how it impacts their circumstances specifically, then you can say, hey, this works for us. This is actually what we wanted to do anyway. Then great, you don't actually need a premarital agreement. But it's part of that discussion is educating yourself on the law. But a prenup is going to cover all sorts of different topics, like defining assets. These are assets that you both currently own individually, that you're going to own together. It could also determine how assets are divided in the event of divorce. So that's kind of an added bonus. So you're defining them for the operations of your agreement, but then, okay, in the event, hopefully the unlikely event, but as we all know, the divorce rates are above 50%. So you have to at least acknowledge that that's a possibility, even if you don't feel that way. And you're setting yourself up with an insurance policy, right? So you can define the assets and then how the assets are being distributed in the event of divorce. That can be both the assets you have now or the assets that you're going to have in the future. You can also define income, how your income is going to be treated during the marriage. What are you going to do with that income? Is it going to go into a joint account that you both have access to? Is it going to go into separate accounts that you each control? And also, how will the money be distributed and how will the income be handled in the event of divorce? This can include just dividing things like bank accounts, but it can also include provisions like spousal support and ongoing kind of financial maintenance in the future in the event of divorce, right? Because often or sometimes, right, there's an imbalance in income in the event of divorce, and we're trying to make sure that everyone can maintain their ability to financially provide for themselves after. And so some states have a spousal support provision. How it's calculated is not necessarily important, but you can determine what that should be, if any. You can waive certain rights, right? You can say, hey, this is a right under the law of the state we live in. We're going to waive that right. We don't want that at all. I'll give you an example. Let's say one of you owns a home, and I'm going to give you an example under California law. I'm a California practicing attorney, so that's important to know. Although this is not legal advice, it's just kind of a general example that I'm providing. If you both own or one person owns a home before the marriage, and there's a mortgage on it, and you get married and you don't have any prenup because California is a community property state, money that is being used to pay down the mortgage is community money, right? Generally, right? We're just going to assume it is. And let's say a divorce happens and you paid the mortgage down over 10 years, but the house is still in one person's name and continued to be during the marriage. Well, now the community has an interest and a reimbursement claim for funds used to pay down that mortgage, because that wasn't just the separate property. So that can be a claim in a prenup that you can waive and say it doesn't matter if money's used that we earned during the marriage. We want to waive that. It's not important to us, right? That's just an example, but you can waive certain rights. You can define business interests. Somebody has a business during the marriage. If that is built up or it has a substantial interest in the event of divorce, that business could have value that you need to buy out your partner for. So you can define business interests. You can decide how that's going to be handled in the event of a divorce. But what I also want to highlight is I often describe prenups as marital operating agreements that happen to impact things in the event of divorce. And the reason I do that is because lots of people are so put off. I gave you the example of, oh, I trust and love my partner. We're going to be together forever. I don't need a prenup. But what you're actually doing is if you're building this operating agreement that you're going to use during your marriage, there's lots of transparency, right? There's a plan for how you two are going to operate financially, how you two are going to make certain investments, how, debt is going to be handled. Can somebody just take out debt without permission? It actually builds some additional parameters for your marriage that builds more trust and highlights the fact that you two are committed to making this work. So you want to eliminate some of the common arguments that happen in the event, or some of the common arguments or issues that lead to divorce. These are things like lack of communication, financial stress, unmet expectations. Now, one of the other, top reasons for divorce is infidelity. There's not, we hear these provisions sometimes about, celebrities, or sometimes in these big prenup cases where, if you cheat, you have to pay me X amount of dollars. I don't think they're super enforceable. They sometimes keep their enforceability or aren't contested simply because public finds out about them and the media wants to keep it on, or the parties want to keep it under wraps from the media, right? But you hear about these types of provisions about infidelity and prenups, and my general practice is I don't include anything that is a punishment or against public policy, because they're just increasing your chances of something like this being set aside. So we're really focusing on what are the types of things that are issues that lead to divorce, and also what are the most expensive things to litigate in divorce. Can we come up with a plan in this agreement so that even if in the worst case there is a divorce, you don't have to hire expensive lawyers to litigate all these issues. You can hire collaborative lawyers, a mediator, and you can just say, okay, here's our premarital agreement that we entered into years ago when things were good and we were working together. We just want this to be divided like this, fill out some paperwork and be on your way. Now, I'm oversimplifying it for sure, but that is the value there. We have insurance policies. We have health insurance, car insurance, life insurance. We hope we don't ever have to use those things, but they're there for a reason, and they're investment tools for a reason, because they help protect us and hopefully help save money in the long run. And so that's one of the things that I really want people to understand, that prenups aren't just about divorce. And they have this kind of mentality, and I think it has to do with prenups really only coming up in the event of divorce, or being threatened when marriages aren't going well, like, oh, remember your prenup, you get nothing if you leave. That in practice, I really don't see that that's the tool that they're being used for. Can they be used that way? Sure, but that's a choice that the couple is making to enter into that type of agreement with those types of power imbalances. I don't often see, really one-sided power imbalances. I look at it as an opportunity to build predictability, stability for the marriage, and strengthen their communication. So premarital agreements, you really want to think legally binding agreement that allows you to opt out of the government's preset rules for your marriage and determine your own set of rules about how you will operate during the marriage and what should happen in the event of divorce. That's the distinction. Now, when we talk premarital planning, we're really talking about the broad sense of all the things that you should do before you say, I do. Now, one of these things could be getting a prenup, but there's a lot of things that I like to tell clients to do before getting to the prenup phase, which is having hard conversations and prepping your marriage to operate in a way that both parties are developing deeper trust, deeper connection, deeper intimacy, and a better understanding of what their future is going to look like. So I'll give you some examples. Some of the hard conversations I tell people to have in my Marry Me Smart course, which is launching later this week, before the end of the month, it kind of navigates through these topics, and I'll give you kind of a highlight of what I think as a divorce attorney are the most important things to address. This includes money, right? Not just what you're going to do with money, but disclosing it all. So sharing credit reports, sharing pay stubs, tax returns, and talking about spending habits, right? How do you spend? How do you save? Then we also talk about your investment goals, your retirement goals, right? What does that timeline look like? And then we talk about assets and wealth as well. What are your current accounts? How much money do you have in the bank account? What does your 401k look like? What does your emergency fund look like? And I walk my couples through all these different conversations and all these different issues that they can have, so that hopefully, right, hopefully they have a pretty fine grasp on the financial circumstances that's going to be a part of their marriage. Whether or not they're going to commingle money, share money or not, it's just understanding what that other person has going on. Because in a lot of states, let's say in California, you kind of take on, the financial strengths and weaknesses of your partner. And sometimes one partner is better at some things than the other. And the goal is that you come up with a plan about how you're going to operate, right? How you're going to handle some of these things. Does one person have a lot of debt? What's your goal for paying it down? And sharing these things with each other now, so that it doesn't build resentment when one person tends to spend more when the other person saves. Well, if you knew that before you got married, holding it against your partner years later kind of is on you, right? You set an expectation that you expected things to change, but they told you who you were because you had these, or who they were because you had these conversations before. So if you have these conversations, you set expectations that the other person agrees to. And what I mean by that is, in so many marriages, they say, well, they never changed. They were the same. They were the same as they were, never grew up, either kept drinking or was just spending. Wasn't the dad I expected them to be, wasn't the mom I expected to be. And I said, well, what made you think that their things were going to change, right? Yes, people change all the time and people need to grow and evolve together. And that's another conversation you're going to have. But you can't expect somebody to change when they did not consent or agree that those are things that they also expected to change and wanted to see happen. I expected them to settle down once we had kids or got married. Why? Right? Why? Why did you expect that? What about their character and what about that they said made you believe that? Just because they would be getting older, or that's what some people do? So you really want to talk about these expectations, and money is really a big focal point of what you expect. So we talk about money, we talk about income, we talk about assets and debts. We talk about values, right? What are your core values and what are the values you want for your life? You're going to cover things like religion, sex, mental health, alcohol and drug use. You're going to talk about, what you want your core values of your family to be, whether that includes kids or not, right? You're going to talk about children. You're going to talk about, should or do we plan on have kids, and what does that look like? What is our timeline? Even if that's just an estimated timeline, just share what you two are thinking so you can see how far apart you are, right? So talking about all these different issues is kind of part of the puzzle. You have these hard conversations, you walk yourself through, you maybe make some notes. This is the brainstorming phase of the premarital planning. You're kind of brainstorming, you're seeing if there's any hiccups, you're seeing if there's any spots you need to work through. Secondary piece of premarital planning is, do you guys want to do premarital counseling, right? Premarital counseling can include speaking with a therapist, something they do it through the church, and working more on the fine-tuning of the communication aspects of your relationship and seeing where you can strengthen those and where the trigger points might be, if you feel like you need that, right? That's kind of the next step is, hey, there's these tight spots we want to work on. And then after that, after you've had these conversations, you've addressed all these different hard topics, you maybe have decided to do some counseling, you feel like you've covered everything and you have a good grasp on what your plan is and where you two want to go with your marriage, then the question becomes, should we get a premarital agreement, right? So now you can kind of see the difference in how they work together. And part of premarital planning and talking about should we get a prenup is, what do we want to know? And people are like, well, I don't really know. Like, I don't really know where to start. I don't really know what questions to ask. Well, finding a lawyer is really the first step, and finding a good lawyer who specializes in premarital agreements. It's really important that you ask those questions. Some family lawyers do prenups, but maybe they do 1 or 2 prenups a year, but they mostly litigate divorce cases, right? To give you an example, I'm about 50%. So I'm 50% litigation and 50% and divorce, so mediation, and about 50% prenups and premarital planning in my practice. I do a lot of prenups on a monthly basis, so not just one-offs through the year. I invest a lot of time in learning about them. It's something I'm really passionate about. Obviously, that's why I talk so much about premarital planning, and am trying to educate people as much as I possibly can about the benefits. So ask those questions. You want to find somebody that specializes in premarital agreements. Then their job is to say, well, what is the law in my state? What do I need to know? And then their job is to also ask you questions about your financial circumstances and say, okay, you own a house. Oh, you don't own a house. Oh, you have a 401k. Here's what you should know about 401ks during marriage and how they get divided in divorce. And that gives you the knowledge to say, okay, well, we talked about all these things. This is how we wanted to handle things. This is how we feel about certain things. This is what the law says. And try to brainstorm, do those things conflict or do they align? Then you can start working towards whether the two of you actually want a premarital agreement. So it's not a one-size-fits-all. I'm a huge advocate of prenups. I think everybody should have them. They're not going to be a bad thing, right? Yes, they can cost money. I don't take that lightly. I understand. I think people should just work them into their wedding budget. It should just be something that you do regularly, just like getting health insurance, just like getting life insurance policies, just like buying a house. It's just, okay, it's one thing we have to do. It costs money. It's part of our kind of checklist. Because the worst case scenario, you get a divorce, you have a plan. And a lot of people are like, well, what if the prenup ends up being worse for me than I would have gotten from court? And I say, well, if you did it right, you knew that there was that risk before. If the lawyer did it right and you invested in the process and didn't just sign on the line, you knew what you could be giving up. You can run some scenarios. I do that with my clients. I say, look, if he keeps making what he's making now, adjust for inflation, and you're making what you're making, adjust for inflation, here's what spousal support should be, for example, right? And instead, they're offering a fixed amount for a fixed number of years. So maybe you're giving up, $10,000 a year, $20,000 a year and you're giving up a couple years worth. And you can kind of paint some pictures. Now, there's never a guarantee. There's a lot of unknowns in people's life, but it's my job as a lawyer, right, to kind of highlight these things and let you know what you're giving up. And I just remind people that in the event of divorce, yes, maybe you could have gotten more if you litigated, but you're also going to pay attorney's fees. It's going to take you time. It's going to increase conflict between you and your spouse. And if you have children, that's going to impact your ability to be good co-parents. So there's so many benefits to having these conversations in advance, and there's so many benefits to prenups. But again, it's mostly about figuring out what's right for you as a couple. I can sit here and say prenups are for everyone. I love them, do them, but they're not right for everybody. But what is right is at least knowing that you made a decision, right? If you don't even invest in learning about the laws of your state and figure out if a prenup is right for you, then come time for divorce, you did make a decision. You just opted into a default prenup that the government decided was right for you. And who are they to decide, right? So you did make a choice, and so you can't really complain at the back end, but also you still have to go get the orders, right? You still have to go ask for the things, negotiate the things. And you're going to do it during a time where emotions are highest, pain is still present, and you're not necessarily thinking from the clearest mindset. And again, that's going to cost you a lot of money, take a lot of time, and can do further damage to the relationship with your partner, especially if you're co-parents. So it's something I really want everybody to think about, but I think it's important to understand the dynamic. And I'll talk about this topic a couple times because there's lots of different ways we can analyze, prenups and the benefits and premarital planning and what that includes. But this is really where Marry Me Smart, which is my premarital planning course, came to life. It's so many people don't understand the benefits. So I hope you guys find this helpful. I'll be popping on lives every Monday around 6:15, and I'll be asking questions throughout the week before to see what specific topics you want. Otherwise, I'm just going to pick one. And I also will be posting content regularly on my page to give you updated information, not only about the launch of Marry Me Smart, which is coming soon, but also other resources that I think are really helpful as you navigate next steps. All right, guys, I will talk to you soon. Hope you have a great evening.